Hey everybody, in this video I will be showing you the types of crankbaits there are to use when bass fishing, when to use them, and what their purpose is. So, if you ask me, there is 3 different types of crankbaits. I will go through each one and explain when to use that exact one. So I just grabbed the first type. There's going to be 3. There's going to be your square bill crankbaits, your deep diving crankbaits, and then your lipless crankbaits, aka rattle traps. So the first one I grabbed are square bills. Square bills have a lip on them, and they are usually a small square lip. They don't always have to be square, but that's where they get their name, square bills. Most of them rattle. You can get them without rattles, and the colors are endless. These are going to be your shallow diving crankbaits. They also float. So what you do is you throw these somewhere where it's shallow, or when they're feeding shallow, and what you do is you retrieve it and then you stop. You retrieve and pause. When you pause it, it'll float back up. When you retrieve it, it'll dive down and then it'll float back up. A lot of times you'll get that reaction bite when it's floating up. Now you can't only fish like that. You can also constantly retrieve it and just figure out what the bass want. Do they want it slow, or or do they want it fast all the way? You know, there's going to be your bigger square bills that are just, the body is bigger. There's going to be your smaller square bills, but square bills all have small lips. They will dive from 1 to like 4 or 5 feet. A lot of times you'll get your basic colors like your shad. If I could tell you what colors to get, I'd just say get your whites and get your bluegill colors. So these two work great. These are your white with blue top, also white top, and then you can also get a little bit of chartreuse in there. Those work great. Now if you're fishing something really dark, you can get your orange tiger color. A lot of my treble hooks are messed up, but your orange tiger is like your crawfish, or it's just darker color. Also good for darker baits or darker water. And then you have like your bluegill color, and also you can do something like a bass color. The color just depends on what they're feeding on and also the water clarity. A good time to throw square bills is around rocks. They will bump on the rocks, make extra noise with the rattles. Also rattle traps can kind of go through grass pretty good. Swim jigs are a little better option if you ask me, but square bills are a completely different bait, so you could throw both. So that's square bills. Square bills are shallow diving crankbaits. The next one is the opposite, deep diving crankbaits. These are going to be good for when your bass are feeding deep, whether it be summer or winter. Most of the time you're going to be fishing them when it is summer and when they are deep, because in the summer they're shallow and deep, so you can do both, you know, like frog in, top water, or you can go deep where it's like Texas rigs and deep diving crankbaits, spoons. But deep diving crankbaits have your huge bills on them. They're big. Now not all of them are big, because you can get your medium diving crankbaits, but most of them that are deep are going to be huge. These will dive, you know, up to like 30 feet depending on the bill size. Most of the time the package will say what it dives to. A lot of times these do not sink, or these do not float. Most of the time they do not float. I have had a few that float, but most of the time they suspend, meaning you crank them down, and then when you stop cranking they just sit there. They don't float and they don't sink, they just sit there. Square bills can also go through rocks and brush decently. Since they have treble hooks, like all these crankbaits, they tend to pick up stuff on the treble hook, so you're going to be, you know, getting your bait back, taking the crap off, and then, you know, throwing it back out. But deep diving crankbaits for me are the best during the summer when they're deep, and also when the bass start to transition into the fall, but early fall. But still, deep diving crankbaits are good for your summer deep bass, and the colors are just the same. If you ask me, you can use shad colors and bluegill colors, and also your bright chartreuse and tiger colors, depending on what they're eating and depending on the color of the water. If you stick to the very end, I'll tell you what rod to use, what line to use on it too. The last type is the lipless crankbaits. These are rattle traps. Almost all of these rattle. You can also find them that don't rattle. These sink straight to the bottom. You can fish these like a Texas rig or a jig, where you just let it sink and then you just kind of like pop it, let it drag on the bottom, and it'll act like a feeding bait fish. A lot of times I use these pre-spawn, imitating a crawfish, like this color here, or this color here. You can also just retrieve these back to you. That can also work. They have more of a side action and they don't really dive. They kind of just stay steady, which sometimes the bass can like. But most of the time, personally, I use these on the bottom. I'll just, I'll kind of just like shake it while retrieving it slow, let it sit for a second, maybe retrieve it a little bit on the bottom. You can also do that. You point your rod at the bottom and retrieve it slowly. It'll kind of like do this. My arm is the bottom, the bottom of the lake. It'll kind of go like this. It'll look like it's feeding, but also kind of looking for food on the bottom. Same deal with colors. You can get something like chrome or white for shad, red and black for your crawfish, orange for your crawfish, and then you got your greens and your chartreuses. It all depends. Those are your crankbaits. Personally, I use a medium moderate rod because you don't want something too powerful because they're treble hooks, and you want a moderate rod so you can get a good hook set, but you also don't want to rip those hooks out, so that moderate action is good. Line, personally, just use fluorocarbon. You can use braid with a fluorocarbon leader, but I would never tie braid to a bottom bait or just in the water bait like these, and I wouldn't use monofilament. But if I had to tell you braid or use monofilament, use monofilament, but use fluorocarbon. You can use 10-pound fluorocarbon. You can go down to 8-pound fluorocarbon if you're using that moderate action rod. Personally, I like braid, 4-carrier braid Power Pro, and then I tie a 10-pound leader of fluorocarbon. And basically that is that. You got your shallow diving crankbaits, aka your square bills. You got your deep diving crankbaits, good for the summer when they're deep, and also winter if they're not too finesse, if they don't want it that slow. Then you can use, I would use in the winter when they're deep. If you want to use a crankbait, use a lipless crankbait. Work it on the bottom, just like a jig or a Texas rig. Alright everybody, I hope you guys learned something. I hope this crankbait video is going to teach you something about at least one thing. I hope you learned one thing at least. If you did enjoy the video, go down below, hit the like button, comment below your favorite type of crankbait, and don't forget to subscribe for more. Thank you.